So you think you want to be king? Imagine the throne. Now imagine it's on fire. Not because someone set it ablaze, though that wouldn't be uncommon, but because ruling in the Middle Ages wasn't glory. It was pressure, heat, the kind that scorches from the inside out. You've seen the movies, you've read the stories. Great halls filled with laughter and meat and music, gleaming swords and loyal knights, crowds that cheer when the king lifts his goblet. But that's not history. That's a bedtime story dressed in silk and lies. In reality, the throne wasn't a seat. It was a target. And every second you wore the crown was a second someone else was trying to take it from your head, either with words, poison, or a blade sharpened in the dark. The truth is this: the crown was not a reward. It was a curse, a gilded trap wrapped in velvet and smeared in blood. And before you even dream about ruling, let me ask you this. Could you survive a single day wearing that crown? Wake up. Not gently, not to sunshine or bird song. You wake up because someone's yelling outside your chamber. The steward's whispering about unrest in the West. Your mistress is crying about her cousin's arrest. And a servant just dropped a tray of wine you didn't even ask for. You're in a cold stone room that smells of smoke, sweat, and barely dried ink from the documents you signed past midnight. There is no luxury here, only ritual. Every object you touch has meaning. Every movement you make is seen. You sit up, and the weight of responsibility climbs onto your shoulders before your feet even hit the floor. Your back already aches, not from age, but from constantly bending toward enemies pretending to be friends. You think a king wakes up rested? A king wakes up haunted. Your day begins not with coffee or contemplation, but with counsel. 10 men in robes who all hate each other file into your hall, bow just enough to stay employed, and start reciting reports designed to make themselves look brilliant and everyone else look incompetent. You listen. You pretend to listen. You watch their eyes, their hands, that twitch in the corner of the mouth when one of them lies about the grain shortage or the border incursion. You nod. You agree. You plot. Because every conversation is a chessboard, and the game never ends. You think being king means you give orders? No. Being king means you calculate who to trust, who to fear, and who will stab you the moment you blink. You want to eat? Sure. You sit in a grand hall surrounded by meat, bread, and wine. None of it tastes good. Why? Because you know any one of those dishes could be poisoned. That goblet of wine? It was poured by a servant whose brother was executed last month. That roast pig? Prepared by a cook who once served your cousin, the one you exiled. So you don't eat with hunger. You eat with suspicion. Every bite is a test. Every swallow a gamble. Some kings had tasters. Most just got lucky. Until they didn't. You think ruling is just giving speeches? You think your word is law? Think again. Every decision you make creates enemies. Raise taxes, the peasants revolt. Lower taxes, the nobles rebel. Side with the church, the lords murmur. Side against the church, your soul is in jeopardy. Approve a marriage, a land grant, a pardon. You please one family and insult 5. Rule with strength, and they call you a tyrant. Rule with mercy, and they call you weak. Rule with wisdom, and they'll still call for your head if the harvest fails. You are not a man anymore. You are a symbol, a breathing icon trapped between power and powerlessness. And let's talk about war, not the glorious, trumpet-filled charges of legend. Real war, dirty, bloody, endless. War is not about bravery. It's about logistics. It's about whether your armorers have enough steel, your horses enough oats, your soldiers enough fear of you to march into slaughter. You don't fight on the front lines. Not always. You command from a tent that leaks in the rain, surrounded by maps and men who would abandon you in a heartbeat if your luck faltered. You ride out knowing your enemy might not even be the one you're fighting. Sometimes it's your own general. Sometimes your own blood. Kings were not above treachery. They were surrounded by it. You think love makes the crown lighter? No. Love makes the target bigger. Every mistress is a scandal. Every child a pawn. Every alliance a transaction. You marry not for affection, but for land, for titles, for armies. And if your wife hates you, which she probably does, too bad. Produce heirs anyway, because your kingdom doesn't care about your heart. It cares about your lineage. Your family isn't a refuge, it's a battlefield. Your sons are threats. Your daughters are bargaining chips. And the moment your bloodline looks weak, vultures circle. A childless king is a dying kingdom. A too fertile king, a civil war in the making. And privacy? What privacy? Every letter you write is read. Every step you take is watched. Even your bed is not safe. Your chambermaids whisper. Your guards are bribed. And if you ever, even once, show fear or sadness or uncertainty, someone will exploit it. You can't break down. You can't cry. You can't rest. You are not a man. You are a mask. And behind that mask is a breaking body, a bleeding soul, and a brain that hasn't slept without nightmares in years. Let's talk about death, because it's never far. Disease doesn't care about crowns. The plague sweeps through castles just as fast as cottages. Nobles die like peasants, fast, ugly, unceremoniously. One infected cook, one unwashed goblet, one traitor with a dagger. And that's it. Your history. If you're lucky, they write songs. If you're not, they write lies. And sometimes you don't even get that. Sometimes you vanish, thrown into a pit, replaced by a cousin, forgotten. And what happens when you die? Does your soul rise in glory? Maybe. But your kingdom descends into chaos. Your heirs fight. Your legacy crumbles. Your name is twisted. Your reforms undone. Your enemies pardoned. Your allies executed. You don't get peace in death. You get replaced, rewritten, reduced to a line in a dusty chronicle, or worse, a villain in someone else's story. So you think you want to be king? You think you're ready to wear that crown? Then ask yourself this. Can you live with every eye on you, every hand against you, every word a threat, every breath a gamble? Can you carry the weight of an entire kingdom on your shoulders, knowing one misstep will drown you in your own blood? Can you rule without resting, love without trusting, lead without doubting, and die without honor? Because in the Middle Ages, the throne wasn't a dream. It was a prison. And the crown? The crown was the heaviest weapon of all. So you think becoming a king meant being born with a silver spoon in your mouth, swaddled in velvet, kissed by angels, and handed a golden rattle as a choir sang your name. Think again. Not all kings were born royal. Some clawed their way to the throne through war, deceit, betrayal, and sheer outrageous fortune. The medieval crown was not a family heirloom passed politely from father to son, with a warm smile and a gentle pat on the back. It was a bloody prize, dragged from corpses, stolen in the night, sanctioned by bribes, or blessed by popes who themselves feared poison in their wine. You didn't inherit power, you seized it. If you were lucky, you were born into a throne-shaped cradle. But most of the time, that cradle was a coffin someone else had to fall into first. Because kingship in the Middle Ages was not a story of destiny. It was a knife fight in a burning room. Civil wars erupted over disputed claims. Brothers killed brothers. Uncles poisoned nephews. Cousins married their enemies, then stabbed them at the wedding feast. Every succession was a gamble. Every coronation a question. Will he last a week? A year? Will his head still be attached to his shoulders by winter? The throne was a game of survival, where the rules changed daily and everyone had a dagger hidden beneath their oath of loyalty. Start with blood. Not royal blood, just blood. Lots of it. Because more often than not, kingship came down to battles. Steel, arrows, screams. Sometimes the only path to the crown was through a field littered with your enemies, your allies, and a few relatives who backed the wrong horse. You wanted the crown? You had to earn it with fire and iron. Conquest wasn't rare. It was common. The sword was often more persuasive than any bloodline. If you had enough men, enough gold, enough fury, you could turn a rebellion into a regime. And when you weren't fighting battles with actual weapons, you were fighting them with alliances. Marriage to the right woman could win you a kingdom. Killing the right woman could win you another. Every union was political. Every child born was a claim. Every child not born was a crisis. You had to map your lineage like a general plans a siege. One wrong move, and your house was gone. Not just metaphorically, but literally. Burned to the ground, salted fields, heads on spikes. Medieval politics didn't believe in soft exits. But if you weren't noble by birth or marriage or blood, there was always another option. Take the crown anyway. Usurpation, treason. That lovely word whispered in the dark corridors of castles when everyone thought the king was asleep. And make no mistake, many kings were not born to rule. They simply decided they should. Charismatic generals, ruthless dukes, even ambitious clerics. If they had enough influence, enough money, enough support from the army or church or people, sometimes all it took was being in the right place at the wrong time. They could march into the capital, declare the throne vacant, and sit on it before the body was cold. And if the people complained, if the nobles balked, if the church hissed with holy outrage, you smiled, you bowed, you offered gifts, or land, or protection, or you silenced them with threats, with arrests, with sudden accidents in dark alleyways. Power wasn't given. It was taken. And once you had it, you had to defend it like a starving dog guards a bone. Because every rival you crushed had a cousin, every ally you bought had a price, and every favor you granted created a dozen new enemies who thought they deserved more. Ah, but then there's the papal blessing. Yes, the holy stamp. A crown placed on your head by a man in robes, declaring that God himself had chosen you. Divine right, they called it. A poetic excuse wrapped in incense and Latin. A political tool dressed up as theology. Because let's be clear, God didn't choose you. The church did. And they expected payment, loyalty, deference, land, gold. And if you didn't deliver, they would find someone else who would. The divine right of kings was often divine theatre, staged to calm the peasants and shame the rebels. A way to wrap your blood-stained rule in celestial silk. But even with the church's blessing, even with banners and trumpets and parades and coins stamped with your face, your crown was never safe. It never truly belonged to you, because behind you, always, were others waiting for you to slip, to age, to grow weak, to show kindness, to fall in love, to make peace, because every human moment was a crack in the armor, and behind that crack, the blade always waited. Sometimes the path to the throne wasn't dramatic. Sometimes it was a whisper, a cough, a stumble, a surprise death. One moment, you're a third son with no future. The next, a plague sweeps the court. A horse throws a prince. A cousin dies of poisoned cherries. And suddenly you're king, through no merit of your own. Just pure, merciless chance. A roll of fate's dice. And when that happened, you weren't blessed. You were cursed. Because the same twist of fate that lifted you up could hurl you down just as quickly. You weren't admired. You were targeted. No one trusted a king made by luck, not even God. And even if you ruled well, even if you were strong, wise, just, it didn't matter. History remembers chaos more than competence. The people want bread, not philosophy. The nobles want power, not fairness. And the crown wants blood, no matter who wears it. You don't rule the kingdom. You bleed for it. You don't own the throne. You rent it until someone stronger, smarter, or crueler comes to evict you. So remember this. Becoming king wasn't about destiny. It wasn't a prophecy. It wasn't fate or right or sacred inheritance. It was war. It was lies. It was family turned enemy, friends turned traitors, and nights spent wondering which sound meant death was coming for you. Kingship wasn't honor. It was endurance. You didn't win it. You survived it. And even then, only just. You still want the crown? Then ask yourself, can you live without trusting anyone? Can you kill a cousin? Marry an enemy? Smile at men you know are plotting your death? Can you spend every waking hour proving that you belong where others have died trying to stand? Because in the end, kingship was never about who deserved the throne. It was about who was still standing on it when the dust settled. And if you were standing, you were already marked for the next storm. Because the crown remembers every drop of blood it ever touched, and it always wants more. The sun isn't even up yet, but your day has already begun. There is no sleeping in. There is no warm cocoon of blankets and silence. The servants have already lit the fire in your chamber, quietly, while you pretended to sleep. One eye open, one hand near the dagger under the pillow. Because even a king's dreams can be dangerous. And your first waking breath isn't for peace or prayer. It's for performance. You are not a man anymore. You are a symbol. And today, like every day, the symbol must be perfect. Every hour is choreographed. Every movement calculated. You rise not because you want to, but because your chamberlain stands ready with your robe, your crown, your dignity. You stretch if you dare, but not too much. A king doesn't groan. A king doesn't sigh. A king stands, with purpose, with poise, even if his bones ache, even if his stomach churns from the wine and whispers of the night before. Your body is not your own. It belongs to the realm, and the realm is always watching. The first act of the day is prayer, not because you are holy, but because you are expected to be. The chapel is cold, the incense thick, the priest monotonous. But you kneel anyway, beneath stained glass windows that filter the morning light into divine judgment. You clasp your hands. You bow your head. You whisper Latin words you've memorized but long since stopped believing. Because belief is irrelevant. Ritual is what matters. Ritual is power, and every noble in the pews is watching to see if your piety slips. Next, the council. a room full of old men and young ambition, nobles in embroidered robes, clerics with ink-stained fingers, generals with blood on their boots, all of them talking, arguing, begging, demanding. You sit at the head of the table, but the table leans toward power, and it's rarely yours alone. Grain taxes, border disputes. The bishop wants more land. The Duke of Eastmarch refuses to send soldiers. The treasury is nearly empty, the army nearly mutinous, and the peasants in the south are threatening revolt over a pig tax you barely remember approving. You nod. You listen. You decide. Or you pretend to. Because even the king must yield to alliances. Even the king must keep enemies close, especially the ones who call you Your Grace. You cannot leave the council without issuing judgments. Today, a land dispute, a theft, a treason trial. You are justice, you are law, you are wrath, and mercy, all at once. The accused kneel. The accusers plead. Witnesses stammer. Evidence is scarce. Truth is a luxury. What matters is perception. If you rule too harshly, you are a tyrant. Too softly, you are weak. You sentence a thief to mutilation, a landowner to exile, a rebellious knight to death. And you must not flinch, because the people must see strength, and if you cry in secret. Then comes ceremony, a knighting, a wedding, a feast, the christening of a noble's fifth child. You stand on marble floors, in halls that echo your titles, defender of the realm, lord of the 5 rivers, chosen of God. You touch swords to shoulders. You hold infants who smell of milk and power. You smile. You pose. You say words crafted by scribes, rehearsed by memory, polished to hide the fact that you barely slept, that your head pounds, that your heart is not in your chest, but buried somewhere beneath 10 layers of silk and duty. Because kings don't feel. Kings perform. You don't eat in peace. You eat on stage. In the great hall, at a raised table, beneath banners that whisper stories of battles you never fought. Courtiers watch your every bite. Ambassadors watch your every nod. Musicians strum. Servants scurry. You cannot enjoy your meal. You must comment on the roast. Laugh at the jester. Praise the visiting noble's daughter. Offer a toast to a treaty you despise. You drink wine, but not too much. You joke, but not too freely. Because every laugh is a signal, every gesture a message. And someone, somewhere, is always waiting to misinterpret you. Afternoon brings the war council. Maps unfurled, miniature horses and flags moved like chess pieces over terrain you've never seen. Reports from the front, bandits, border skirmishes. The general insists on more cavalry. The admiral demands new ships. The chancellor whispers about treachery in the west. You nod again. You question. You give orders. But every command is a risk. Every command is a bet, with lives, with gold, with the fragile illusion of control. If the war goes well, your name is carved into stone. If it goes poorly, your head might be. Evening is a masquerade, a dance, a performance within a performance. You walk among nobles, masked and masked again. You pretend to enjoy the music. You flatter wives. You humor lords. You dodge intrigue like arrows. Every word you speak echoes into gossip. Every touch you grant becomes rumor. A glance too long at a lady, and a scandal is born. A slight too deep to a lord, and a rebellion brews. You retreat to your chambers exhausted, but the day is not over. Because now come the letters, the petitions, the secrets, missives from spies, pleas from prisoners, updates from foreign courts. The queen wants a word. Your mistress waits in the next room. Your son is angry. Your daughter is ill. You're tired, but there is no rest. You are a king. Your life is not your own. Your thoughts are not safe. Your walls have ears. Your bed has shadows. You undress. Not alone. Servants disrobe you like you're a statue. Your robe is folded. Your crown placed in its box. Your hands washed. Your feet warmed. But nothing warms your soul, because the day may be over, but tomorrow waits with new fires, new decisions, new dangers, and you must do it all again, without hesitation, without emotion, without error, because royalty is performance art, and every mistake is fatal. Being king is like sitting on a throne made of knives. Every breath is sharp. Every move draws blood. And the deeper you sink into power, the closer the blade gets to your throat. You are not safe. Not in the council chamber. Not in your bed. Not in your prayers. Not even in your thoughts. Because in the Middle Ages, politics was not a game. It was war in disguise. And the battlefield wasn't the field at all. It was the court. Polished stone floors, silk robes, quiet voices, smiling assassins. You think ruling is about governance, about justice, about wisdom and honor and divine guidance? It's not. It's about survival. And survival means understanding one brutal truth. Everyone wants your head. The nobles who smile as they kneel. The clergy who preach loyalty while counting your sins. The merchants who fund your wars and dream of your ruin. The knights who swear fealty and watch for weakness. Your brother, your son, your wife, your friends, especially your friends. The first rule of staying alive is simple. Trust no one. The second rule, trust even less than that. Every ally is a future traitor. Every compliment is a trap. Every gift a bribe. Every silence a strategy. If you're not paranoid, you're already dead. Start with the court. It's not a place of order. It's a theater of deception. Every nod is a lie. Every bow is a calculation. The nobles are not your supporters. They are rival warlords who wear perfume instead of armor. They come to your court to watch, to test, to whisper. They bring gifts. They bring daughters. They bring rumors. And you must greet them all, not with warmth, but with weapons of the mind. Because one wrong word becomes a rebellion. One wrong look becomes an insult. One wrong judgment becomes a pretext for war. You think court jesters are there for laughter? No. They're there to say the things no one else can say. And when they joke about your thinning army or your ill-tempered son, you laugh, even when your fists clench, because you can't show offense. Offense is weakness, and weakness is death. Then there's the clergy, holy men with unholy ambitions. They tell you God chose you. They also tell your rivals the same. One papal letter, and your reign is damned. One whispered accusation of heresy, and you're burning at the stake in your own cathedral. You need the church. But the church doesn't need you. They speak Latin, but they think in gold. And they trade absolution like a merchant trades salt. For influence, for land, for secrets. They see your soul, yes, but only because they're measuring its worth in silver. Your family? They're the sharpest knives of all. Blood doesn't bind. Blood betrays. Your brother remembers when you took the bigger slice of meat. Your cousin remembers when you pushed him in the river. Your sons want what you have. Your daughters are pawns in someone else's game. And if they hate who they marry, that's your fault too. Even your queen, your partner in crown and crown bed, knows you only married her for the alliance. And she knows you know. And you know she knows. And still you lie together in cold silence because politics doesn't sleep. Every decision you make has 10 interpretations. Every delay has 5 consequences. You choose one noble over another, and you start a feud that could smolder for decades. You tax the wrong province and spark riots. You pardon a thief, and a bishop calls you immoral. You execute a traitor, and his widow poisons your wine. There are no good choices, only survivable ones. Bribery is not scandalous, it's essential. You pay the guards to guard you. You pay the cooks not to poison you. You pay the priest not to confess your sins to your enemies. And you pay in more than gold. You pay in favors. You pay in marriages. You pay in silence. And sometimes you pay in blood. Blackmail is a language everyone speaks. You know what the bishop did last Lent. The duke's bastard son. You raised him in secret. The knight's gambling debts, covered by your treasury. You don't forget these things. You catalogue them, because one day you'll need them. And when that day comes, you'll whisper a word, and an empire will shift. Forced alliances are the mortar of your crumbling castle. You shake hands with the man who killed your uncle. You toast with the woman who once tried to poison your heir. You sign treaties with men who would set fire to your throne the moment your back turned. And you do it all while smiling. Because kingship isn't about feeling. It's about lasting. And betrayal? Betrayal is routine. It's not a surprise. It's not an exception. It's a Tuesday. Your closest advisor lies to your face. Your general takes bribes from a foreign king. Your cousin opens your letters. Your own son courts rebellion in the guise of reform. You discover plots every week. You survive them by punishing just enough. Never too much, never too little. Hang one conspirator. Exile another. Promote a third. Because keeping your enemies close isn't just a proverb. It's a necessity. You never eat first. You never walk alone. You never open your own letters. You never say everything you know. You never forget a slight. You never forgive a threat. You keep a dagger beneath your cloak. You keep a spy in every chamber. You keep a priest who fears you more than he fears God. And still, you are never safe. There is no end to the game. No moment where you can breathe without suspicion. No friend who isn't a risk. No ally who isn't a threat. You rule through illusion, through shadows, through fear, and through exhaustion. Because the moment you relax, the moment you think you've won, you'll be bleeding on the floor of your own hall, staring up at a face you once trusted, whispering your last words through a mouth full of blood and disbelief. So how do you keep your head? You never stop looking over your shoulder. You never stop calculating. You never stop acting. You never let them see you hesitate. You let them think you're strong, even when you're terrified. You make an example when you must. You forgive when you must. And when you cannot do either, you disappear the problem. Quickly, quietly, completely. Because political survival isn't about ruling well. It's about ruling long enough to die in your bed, and not on your knees. The throne is a stage. The king is an actor, and the audience is armed. Curtain never closes. Stakes never drop. And one wrong line, just one, and the knives fall. So wear the crown carefully. Speak softly. Smile convincingly. And never ever forget. The moment you stop fearing them, they stop fearing you. A true king led from the front, or died trying. There was no safe throne in the Middle Ages. No palace so far removed from the battlefield that the blood couldn't reach it. If you wore the crown, you wore the burden. And if your kingdom went to war, you didn't watch from a balcony. You mounted a horse, gripped your sword, and rode straight into the storm, because that's what kings were expected to do. Be generals, be warriors, be icons carved in steel and soaked in blood. You couldn't hide behind your title. You had to earn it with every strike, with every scar. Warfare wasn't romantic. It wasn't banners fluttering and horns sounding and noble speeches before glorious charges. It was mud. It was rot. It was frost-bitten feet, shattered knees, arrows through cheeks, spears through lungs. It was chaos that didn't care about your lineage, screams that drowned out prayers. You fought beside peasants whose names you didn't know. You saw lords soil themselves. You saw boys die with swords too big for their arms. And you kept fighting. Because if you didn't, you weren't just losing a battle, you were losing your kingdom. The king's presence on the battlefield wasn't ceremonial. It was crucial. His banner was a rallying point. His armor was a message. His survival was morale. If you fell, your army collapsed. If you fled, your legend burned. Because war was theater, but the king was the centerpiece. You had to be seen. You had to be fearless. You had to ride at the front, even if your heart was pounding like a drum. And if you hesitated, even once, if your sword wavered or your horse turned, it was over. Because the enemy was always watching. Lose a battle, and you lost more than men. You lost loyalty. Nobles reconsidered their allegiances. Allies drifted. Vultures circled. Your throne shook beneath you. If you were lucky, you lived to negotiate a truce. If you were not, you were paraded through the enemy capital in chains, spat upon, tortured, or quietly buried in a ditch with your armor stripped and your legacy erased. Victory didn't come cheap. It came in bodies, in scorched villages, in empty fields, in coin borrowed from merchants who would later demand favors you couldn't afford. You had to feed your men, pay them, inspire them, lead them into death, and then lead more into more death. You had to march for weeks, sometimes months, over terrain that hated you, through rain, through snow, through sickness. You watched men vomit blood. You buried them by the hundreds, and then you told the rest to keep walking. A crown on the battlefield was a target. Your armor was gilded, your helmet crested, your horse taller than the rest, because you were meant to be seen. That was your curse. The enemy aimed for you. Archers trained for your silhouette. Assassins were paid to find your tent. Your own men watched you to see if you would break. You never could. You had to look invincible, even when your ribs were cracked and your thigh was bleeding through the chain mail. And you never fought just one enemy. Behind the front lines, other battles raged. Your generals argued, your nobles plotted. The church questioned your motives. The court grew restless. News from home was delayed, distorted, or delivered with trembling hands. A bad harvest, a brewing rebellion, a rival claiming your absence was abandonment. You fought on two fronts, one with steel, one with whispers. Even victory could be dangerous. Win too quickly, and you aroused suspicion. Win too brutally, and you made new enemies. Win too often, and your allies feared you. And if you lost, you weren't just a failure. You were a fraud, a pretender, a boy who played king until war revealed the truth. The army was not just soldiers. It was politics on legs, knights from rival houses, mercenaries with shifting loyalties, captains who resented your command, peasants who followed you because they feared you, not because they loved you. You had to speak to them like a priest, command like a tyrant. bleed like a martyr. You had to know when to charge, when to retreat, when to sacrifice, and when to lie, to your men, to your court, to yourself. You were never clean, not in body, not in conscience. You smelled of sweat, of horse, of smoke and death. Your hands were never still. They shook when you thought no one was looking. Your sword weighed more than your crown, but you had to carry both, always, without falter. Your camp was not rest, it was risk. Spies crept in. Assassins wore your colors. Disease spread faster than orders. You ate cold meat. You drank thick wine. You slept in your armor, one eye open, one hand on the hilt. You were never alone. You were never safe. Even surrounded by thousands, you were the most vulnerable man alive, because the higher the crown sits, the further it has to fall. And when the battle finally came, it was not what you had planned. It never was. The ground turned to mud. The archers missed. The cavalry flanked too early. The wind blew the banners the wrong way. The enemy changed tactics. Your horse panicked. Your sword slipped. You were thrown, or you triumphed, but not cleanly. There was no honor in the aftermath, only smoke, screams, the moans of the dying, the silence of the dead. And then you rode back, or were carried, or never returned at all. You faced the court with a smile that didn't reach your eyes. You told tales of glory, of valor, of divine favor. And you lied, because the truth was bloodier than the tapestry could ever depict. The truth was that war didn't make you a king. It unmade you. So when the crown goes to battle, it doesn't march behind. It rides first. It bleeds first. It falls first. And if it survives, it is not the same crown. It is heavier. It is cracked. It is stained. And it is never safe, because there is always another war. And the enemy is always watching. The crown wasn't made of gold. It was made of fear, pain, and exhaustion. Gold was just the polish on the iron weight that sank into your skull the moment it touched your head. It gleamed for the people, for the nobles, for the history books. But inside, it burned, it tore, it crushed. It was not a symbol of triumph. It was a sentence for life, if you were lucky, for death, if you were not, and sometimes both at once. Being king meant becoming something no man was ever meant to be, a symbol, a myth, a machine. And machines break, especially when they're made of flesh and bone. Your body is not yours. It's the property of the realm, and it wears down, slowly. Then all at once, your back curves from long councils. Your eyes sting from smoke-filled halls. Your skin breaks out in sores from stress and poor diet. You bleed from your gums. You tremble when you try to sign your name. You sweat at night and freeze by morning. You age not in years, but in decisions, because the crown doesn't allow rest. It doesn't allow weakness. It only demands more. Insomnia is not a side effect. It is standard. You lie in bed, staring at the ceiling beams above you, listening to every footstep in the corridor, wondering if this is the night your wine was tainted, if this is the moment your guard is bribed, if this is how it ends, silently, suddenly, without justice. You drift in and out of fevered half-sleep, dreaming of dead brothers, lost battles, failing harvests, sons who hate you, and nobles who smile with knives behind their teeth. You wake up more tired than when you closed your eyes, and then you rise because you must, and put on the robes, the mask, the weight. Paranoia is not madness. It is survival. If you trust anyone, you die. If you relax for a moment, you die. If you misread a whisper or misjudge a look, you die. Every day you live is another day someone plans to kill you. That servant who's been acting strangely. That priest who pauses too long before blessing you. That cousin who visits more often than necessary. The ambassador with too perfect manners. You see threats in every gesture because they're real. And the worst part is not knowing when the next betrayal will come. It's knowing it will come and pretending you're not afraid. Physical illness doesn't discriminate. Royal blood didn't save you from gout, from syphilis, from tuberculosis, from the worms that crawl through your intestines and feed on the scraps of your feasts. You cough blood. You sweat through silks. Your joints swell like ripe fruit. You limp to the throne. You hold your scepter with fingers twisted by arthritis. Your bladder leaks. Your breath stinks. And no one will tell you the truth. They will flatter you while you rot. They will bow while your body decays. And when you die, they will gasp in shock, as though the cracks weren't already there, plain as day. And what of the mind? It breaks in silence, slowly, a splintering that no one dares name. Madness is in your blood, inherited like the crown itself. You watched your father talk to ghosts. You watched your uncle flinch at shadows. You heard the rumors about your grandfather's screams in the night. And now you wonder when it begins for you. When the thoughts turn against you. When your reflection starts whispering. When the birds outside your window begin speaking truths only you can hear. You write notes to yourself to remember what's real. You test your own memory like a prisoner tapping the walls for cracks. You try to confide in someone. But who? The queen? She fears you. The nobles, they serve you. The servants, they obey you. No one knows the real you, and no one ever will. Loneliness becomes the closest thing you have to a companion. It's the only constant. It never asks for favors. It never lies to your face. You dine in grand halls filled with hundreds, and yet feel nothing. Because the laughter is forced, the praise is hollow, the touch is calculated. No one loves you. Not really. They love what you represent. What you can give. What you control. And you never forget it. You can't. Because if you forget, if you believe the illusion, if you think for one moment that the smiles are real, you will be destroyed. And so you sit on the throne, your joints ache, your stomach burns, your heart races. You feel like screaming, but you don't. You smile, you nod, you pass laws, you name heirs, you bury traitors, you dance, you host feasts, you ride into battle, you give sermons, you sign death warrants, you bless marriages, you kneel in churches, and through it all, your soul curls in on itself like paper in flame. The burden of the crown is not power, it is pressure, unrelenting, soul-deep pressure. It weighs more than steel, it scars deeper than any sword, and it cannot be removed, even when you sleep, even when you weep, even when you beg in the quiet of your chambers for one day, just one day, where you could be human again. But you cannot. Because the realm never sleeps, the court never forgets, and the crown never forgives. It remembers your failures, it magnifies your fears, it feeds on your doubts, and it will grind you down, inch by inch, day by day, until the man is gone and only the title remains. You are king, and you are dying, and no one dares to say it. Not even you. You didn't marry for love. You married for armies, for land, for treaties, for loyalty that could be measured in war horses, in grain shipments, in how many archers her father could bring to your next rebellion. The wedding wasn't a celebration, it was a negotiation, a calculated gamble wrapped in velvet and incense. The bride walked down the aisle, not as a lover, but as a symbol. A living contract between two houses that barely trusted each other and never would. You lifted the veil not to see her face, but to assess the leverage she brought to your side of the chessboard. Sons were threats, daughters were tools. Your children weren't born into your arms, they were born into your plans. Every child was weighed before they could walk. Could they marry a foreign prince? Could they unite a rival claim? Could they bind a rebellion to your bloodline or shatter it with a whisper? You held your baby and thought not of their laugh, but of their usefulness. And once they grew, they watched you the same way. Because the heir wanted your crown, the spare wanted your crown, and the daughters knew that one day they would be sold like livestock to the highest bidder who had the right banners, the right army, the right blood. Your brother smiled at court, but measured your guards with his eyes. Your mother offered you wine while placing her spies in your bedchamber. Your uncles remembered the day your father died, and the promises they weren't given. Every cousin was a potential traitor. Every aunt a mouthpiece for whispers you couldn't trace. The family wasn't a haven, it was a maze, and every path led to your downfall if you weren't careful. Wives wanted influence, not affection. You gave them titles, crowns, children, and in return they demanded counsel, alliances, private audiences. They wanted to shape the court, to sway the clerics, to guide the future heir. And if you refused, they wrote letters to foreign kings. They hosted gatherings you weren't invited to. They raised your sons in silence, turned them against you with sweet words and softer poison. You shared a bed. But not trust. Never trust. That was suicide. Betrayal didn't come with a blade. It came with silence, with a pause in the conversation, with a glance across the table that lasted too long. It came with a rumor repeated by a servant, a letter intercepted, a cousin who arrived early for the hunt and brought twice as many men as he should have. The danger was never outside the walls. It lived in your nursery. It knelt beside your throne. It shared your blood. The family dinner table was a battlefield without blood, until it spilled. Meals were eaten in silence or with rehearsed laughter. Every course a performance. You sat beside your heir and wondered if he was already plotting your funeral. You offered a toast and watched for whose goblet trembled. You kissed your wife's hand and remembered the messenger who said her brother met with your rival last week. You bit into roast duck and wondered who had spoken to the cook that morning. You left the table no wiser, only more exhausted, because the masks never slipped. Not in public, not in private. You saw your family more clearly than anyone else and trusted them less. Inheritance wasn't a right, it was a trap. Naming an heir was signing your own death warrant. The moment your son became the future king, he started counting the days until you weren't. You tried to train him, tried to prepare him, but he watched you with hungry eyes. He saw your mistakes, your weakness, your indecision, and he waited. Your younger sons grew resentful, each one wondering why it wasn't him, each one wondering how to change it. Brothers turned into rivals, daughters turned into political currency. And you? You tried to stay ahead. One marriage, one alliance, one public display of unity at a time. Family was not flesh and bone. It was strategy and survival, a weapon with 1,000 edges, and none of them dull. You forged it carefully, sharpened it daily, and still, it cut you. Not once, not suddenly, but constantly, quietly, with every missed glance, with every door that didn't open, with every child who smiled just a little too perfectly. There was no loyalty without leverage, no love without loss. Your kin knew your secrets because they shared them. Your failures were theirs, your victories, their stepping stones. You ruled the realm, but they ruled the dinner table, the nursery, the bedchamber, the private chapel, the council behind the council. You wore the crown, but they wore your blood. And blood, in the Middle Ages, was the most dangerous force of all. It justified rebellion. It sanctified betrayal. It gave treason a family name and wrapped knives in silk. And the closer someone was to you, the deeper the wound when they struck. So you built walls around your throne, around your trust, around your heart. You told yourself it was worth it, that this was how power worked, that this was how kings ruled, alone, but never truly alone, surrounded by names, but never by safety, bound by blood, but never by love. And still you hoped that one day your son would defend you, that your daughter's marriage would bring peace, that your wife would smile without calculation, that your brother would stand beside you in battle and not behind you with a dagger. But you didn't count on it, because counting on family was counting on fire not to burn. And you learned that lesson early. The crown wasn't just a burden of politics or war. It was a burden of blood. Family was supposed to be your strength. But in the Middle Ages, it was the sharpest weapon in the room. And it was always pointed at you. Kings feared God more than they feared war, because war could kill your body, but God could damn your soul. In the Middle Ages, that mattered. Eternity was not a metaphor. It was a reality you planned for with every breath. Heaven and hell weren't abstract. They were vivid landscapes painted on cathedral walls, sung in the chants of trembling monks, carved into the tombs of kings who prayed they'd done enough. The church did not suggest. It commanded. It didn't advise. It judged. And no crown, no army, no castle wall could keep judgment away. You ruled the realm, but the Pope ruled your right to rule. One letter from Rome could shake your throne more than 1,000 enemy knights. If you lost the church, you lost everything. Your people believed in divine right, yes, but divine right came with divine oversight. The Pope could anoint you or excommunicate you. He could crown you or curse you. He could call you the chosen of heaven or a devil in human skin. And when the church spoke, people listened. They fasted. They wept. They rebelled. Because to defy the church was to defy God, and to defy God was to risk eternal fire. Every action you took had to be righteous, or at least look like it. Go to war? You'd better have a papal blessing. Execute a noble, justify it with scripture, raise taxes, build a cathedral, seize land, claim it was corrupt and needed cleansing. The church gave you the language of legitimacy, and if you spoke it wrong, you paid. Not with votes, with revolt, with famine blamed on your sin, with enemies painted as saints and your name blackened in every sermon. The church wrote history. The chroniclers were monks, and ink, when sanctified, was sharper than any sword. You couldn't just be king, you had to be holy, or at least appear to be, which meant confession. But confession was not comfort. It was strategy, or it was panic. You knelt before a priest, not always to unburden your soul, but to test if your secrets were safe. You whispered sins half true and half disguised. You waited for absolution, not as a sinner, but as a ruler calculating how much penance was worth the crime. And when panic took you, when the plague came, or the sky turned red, or your dreams filled with burning, then you confessed in truth, and you begged, because kings die. But judgment never does. The church had power over your subjects, but it also had power over your conscience. Every victory could be hollow if not sanctified, every defeat a sign of God's displeasure. You won a battle and gave thanks. You lost a war and questioned your soul. Was it pride? Was it greed? Had you failed in some holy duty? You fasted. You gave alms. You marched barefoot in the rain to show penance. And still, you wondered if God had turned his face from you. You built monasteries not just for piety, but for protection, for redemption. Because stone might outlive sin, and maybe prayer could outshout guilt. Monks whispered prayers in the night for your soul. Bishops interpreted omens. Relics were carried into battle beside your sword. Saints were invoked before you spoke. And every illness you suffered, every tragedy in the kingdom, every storm or drought or stillborn child, it all had meaning, divine meaning, punishment, warning. A king who ignored the signs was a king who signed his own downfall. You didn't own your kingdom. God did. You ruled by his grace, and if he withdrew it, you became nothing. Worse than nothing, a usurper, a tyrant, a cursed soul marked for ruin, and ruin always came in time. Even the most faithful kings fell. Even the holiest palaces burned. Because sin, they said, always found you, even behind walls of gold. But still you tried. You prayed in Latin you barely understood. You kissed the feet of relics brought to your court. You funded churches. You fed lepers. You banned festivals when they mocked saints. You wept during Mass. And you asked your chaplain every night, was it enough? Was it ever enough? And in your final days, old, weak, afraid, you clutched a crucifix not as a symbol of rule, but as your last hope. You dictated your will with trembling lips, ensuring lands were donated, prisoners freed, enemies forgiven. You confessed again. You begged again. Not for your crown, not for your legacy, but for your soul. Because everything you built, everything you fought for, everything you were, none of it mattered if the gates of heaven remained closed. And the church watched. The priest listened. And God, you hoped, was merciful, because the Pope could make or break your legitimacy. But only God could decide where you would spend eternity. And eternity was long, longer than any reign, longer than any throne, longer than any crown could ever hold. No king rules forever. Most don't even die in peace. They dream of legacy, of tombs carved in marble, of names whispered in reverence for centuries to come. But the truth is sharper, colder, more final. Most kings fall, not with dignity, not with glory, but with a scream, a stumble, a betrayal too quick to stop. They fall in silence. They fall in blood. They fall in fire and rot and dust. They fall not because they were unworthy, but because power is borrowed, and it always comes due. The crown is not loyal. It does not care for character. It is not impressed by lineage. It rewards ruthlessness, punishes hesitation, and devours sentiment. A king may rise by blood, by conquest, by divine fiction, but the fall is always human. One mistake, one scandal, one rumor whispered in the wrong ear, one grain shortage, one broken promise, one noble whose ego was bruised, one tax too high, one war too long, one famine too bitter, and the crown falls with the head still in it. Some kings are dethroned by cousins, the ones who smiled at coronations, who toasted your health at banquets, who offered peace while drawing maps of your downfall. They wait for your weakness, a sickness, a failed campaign, a botched alliance, and then rebellion. Armies raised in your name, not for you but against you. Towns taken, castles turned, servants bribed. By the time you realize you've been outmaneuvered, your own generals have switched sides. Your own son rides beneath a banner that no longer bears your sigil. Others fall to the mob. The people you thought too hungry to care. The peasants you taxed, ignored, condemned. They rise not with strategy, but with rage. Pitchforks, torches, stones. Not because they know who should rule, but because they know who should not. You. They storm your gates. They tear down your banners. They chant your name not in praise, but in fury. They drag you through the streets, strip you of silks, spit in your face. You were once a symbol of God's order. Now you're just a man in the mud, pleading with voices that no longer kneel. Execution is the final theatre. It's not just punishment. It's punctuation. It erases power. It rewrites memory. One swing of the axe, and the man becomes myth or monster. They dress you in clean robes. They allow a priest. They offer final words. But the crowd isn't here for peace. They're here for closure. You kneel, and the world watches. Some weep, some cheer, all remember, but not for long. Oblivion waits for most kings. A few lines in a dusty chronicle. A broken statue in a courtyard no one visits. Your name becomes a cautionary tale. Your achievements are lost to time. Your failures are exaggerated. You are no longer feared, no longer loved. You are irrelevant. A footnote, a shadow. The fall can be slow, a creeping collapse, hidden behind ceremonies and strained smiles. The court grows colder, the nobles less eager, the treasury lighter, the kingdom quieter, until the silence becomes suffocating, until your voice echoes in empty halls, until you look around and realize that though you still wear the crown, no one is listening, or the fall can be shockingly fast. A coup, a rebellion, a betrayal inside your own bedchamber. You go to sleep a king and wake up a prisoner, your crown taken, your scepter snapped, your throne given to someone younger, hungrier, better connected. They rewrite your laws, rename your holidays, burn your banners, and speak your name only when they need a villain. Some kings try to fight it. They gather loyalists. They make speeches. They flee across borders. But time is not kind to deposed rulers. Every mile is a risk. Every ally a potential seller. You travel in disguise, eat like a beggar, sleep in barns, waiting for a miracle. And when it doesn't come, you're hunted down like a beast, not captured for mercy, captured for spectacle. A few kings are spared execution, but not humiliation. Exiled, imprisoned, mutilated. Their sons killed, their wives taken. Their names stripped from coins, erased from documents, cursed in churches. Their portraits defaced, their legacies undone. A living death. Power removed not just from the body, but from history. Legacy means nothing when the executioner holds the axe. Your divine right cannot stop steel. Your noble blood cannot stop the rope. Your ancestors cannot shield your neck. And the people you once ruled, they have long memories and short tempers. This is how kings fall. Not from a single moment, but from 1,000 ignored warnings, 1,000 sharpened smiles, 1,000 prayers unanswered. And when the fall comes, it's not quiet. It's not clean. It's a collapse of authority, of myth, of identity. It's the moment a man who once held all things realizes he can hold nothing. So rule while you can. Feast while you can. Order while they obey. Speak while they listen. Because the crowd will gather. The knives will come out. The bell will toll. And you will wonder, not if, but when. Not why, but who. Not how to rule, but how to fall. Because every reign ends. And some don't end with sleep. They end with steel. Statues don't bleed. Songs don't scream. The pages of history are clean, not because the past was clean, but because someone wiped the blood away before they wrote it down. What we call history is not truth. It's memory polished by time. It's power wrapped in myth. It's silence where there was once screaming. And when we remember kings, we remember the crown, not the cracked spine beneath it. We remember their conquests, not their sleepless nights, their speeches, not their regrets, their coronations, not their confessions. We remember crowns, not the pain underneath them. We remember the golden glow of paintings that never captured the stench of fever or the sound of the dagger pulled in the dark. We repeat their names as if they were symbols. Richard the Lionheart, Charles the Bold, Henry the Great, and forget the men behind them were fallible, frightened, frail, men who made mistakes, who wept in secret, who screamed when they bled. But that's not what the books say. Because history lies, it beautifies, it simplifies, it removes the filth and leaves the glory. It edits the screams out of the battle. It erases the fever from the bed. It turns flesh into legend. You think you know a king because his name is carved into stone? Because his face is on a coin? That's not a man. That's a mask. That's propaganda, chiseled into marble by men paid to forget the truth that kings were afraid, that they questioned their own legitimacy, that they wondered if God had truly chosen them, or if it was all a convenient lie, that they stood over maps, not with confidence, but with dread, that they begged priests for forgiveness, because they feared the judgment of heaven more than the judgment of their court. The real kings were complex. They were clever and cruel and kind and broken all at once. They gave mercy with one hand and signed executions with the other. They kissed their children good night and ordered someone else's children to die before sunrise. They bathed in luxury, but carried sickness in their blood. They rode to battle armored like gods, but whispered prayers before every charge. They smiled in portraits and screamed into pillows. They ruled nations but couldn't control their own families. And history doesn't care. It has no use for complexity. It wants a story, a narrative, a villain or a hero, a triumph or a tragedy. Nothing in between. So it picks and chooses. It praises the king who built a cathedral and ignores the slaves who died building it. It celebrates the battle won and forgets the cities burned. It glorifies peace without mentioning how many voices were silenced to achieve it. It writes in ink, but the truth was written in blood. The chroniclers served kings. The painters flattered them. The poets turned war into romance. And we, centuries later, inherit the illusion. We look at statues and think that's how they stood. Strong, serene, noble. But statues don't show the bent back of bureaucracy, the hunched shoulders of anxiety, the ulcers, the madness, the decay. And when we sing of kings, we do not sing of the mornings they couldn't rise from bed, of the food they couldn't keep down, of the friends they watched hang, of the wives they failed, of the sons who despised them, of the ghosts that followed them down candlelit corridors and whispered their failures at night. What is legacy but what survives the fire? A few letters, a crown locked in glass, a tapestry too faded to question, and lies, beautiful lies, passed from generation to generation until no one remembers what really happened, until we think being king was glory, that it was power, that it was respect, that it was noble. But it wasn't. It was burden, it was fear, it was isolation so complete that even in a room full of courtiers the king was always alone. It was pressure so great that every decision echoed for centuries, and every failure was recorded with glee by enemies waiting for their chance to rise. It was performing perfection until the day your heart failed, or your enemies stopped waiting, or your own son knocked on the door with soldiers behind him. And still we teach children that kings were chosen by heaven, that they ruled with wisdom, that they were father to the nation. No mention of the bribes, the assassinations, the treaties broken the moment they were signed. No mention of the screaming, no mention of the blood. So when you imagine yourself on the throne, when you picture velvet and gold and obedient crowds chanting your name, remember what's not in the painting. The cough that doesn't stop, the food you can't eat, the cousin watching too closely, the wife who no longer smiles, the heir who no longer kneels, the bishop who warns that God sees all, and the sword that hangs above you, never sheathed. The throne is not a seat of honor. It is a trap of stone wrapped in silk. The crown is not a prize. It is a cage of gold, and the people who wear it don't rise to legend. They are dragged there, kicking, bleeding, and gasping for air. History will not save you. It will carve your face into coins and forget your name. It will praise your wisdom and erase your screams. It will take everything you suffered and package it into a story someone else will profit from. And when they speak of your legacy, they won't mention how it felt to wear the crown, only how it looked. So go ahead. Dream of kingship. Dream of thrones. Dream of power. But let me ask you one final question. Still think you'd survive the throne?